In any reckoning of the human condition, particularly one as grim as its perennial conflict with itself, the Battle of Tukayyid looms as an event both monumental and tragic, a study in paradox and squandered potential. The details are by now well documented. The combined forces of the clans, those martial epitomes of ambition and engineered excellence, were halted in their inexorable march toward terror by the desperate gambit of Comstar's Comguards. The victory, if it can be called that, was secured not by ingenuity alone, but by a quirk of the enemy's ethos, their rigid adherence to the suffocating constraints of their own sense of honor. The clans, for all their brutality and alienness, brought with them the faint promise of a future free from the moribund systems of the inner sphere. They were not merely conquerors, they were the architects of a vision, if one can be both horrified and grudgingly admiring of such a vision that sought to remake humanity in a crucible of strength and purpose. In their defeat, one must ask, what did we preserve? What precisely did humanity win? The clans, let us acknowledge, were not infallible. Indeed, they were fractured, even as they professed unity. At Tukayyid, this disunity was made manifest by the fact that the clans operated not as a cohesive army, but as individual entities pursuing their own glory. Yet the most decisive factor in their failure was not a lack of skill, courage, or resources, but their fidelity to their peculiar code of Zellbriggen, their ceremonial adherence to a formalized, ritualistic mode of battle. It is no exaggeration to say that the Inner Sphere's survival rested not on its own strength, but on the particularities of Clan Wolf's dominance in the halls of Strana Mekti. Had another clan, Jade Falcon, Smoke Jaguar, or God help us, the implacable Ghost Bears, held sway over the Grand Council, we might not be reflecting on a victory at all. It is Clan Wolf, that strange and singular amalgam of ruthlessness and pragmatism, that stands as the linchpin of this improbable tale. Led by the enigmatic Ulrich Kerensky, a man who could see the weaknesses in his own people even as he sought to lead them. The wolves tempered their predatory instincts with a grudging respect for the broader currents of history. Their tactical brilliance and ability to adapt, something the other clans viewed as distastefully inner sphere, ensured they did not overcommit their forces or squander their resources in futile gestures of pride. And yet, for all their pragmatism, even the wolves were bound by the strictures of their warrior ethos. Zellbriggen, a doctrine designed to elevate war to an art form, proved not their strength but their undoing. The clan's decision to fight independently without mutual support and to adhere to a rigid code that limited their strategic flexibility turned what might have been an overwhelming onslaught into a series of isolated and manageable encounters for the defenders. One shudders to think what might have transpired had the Ilkhan been a more strident crusader, one willing to abandon honor for expedience. The Inner Sphere was spared not by its own virtue, but by the clan's adherence to a flawed ideal. This is where the paradox becomes excruciatingly clear. Tukayyid was a victory that prolonged a system utterly unworthy of its preservation. The rotten edifice of the Inner Sphere, its feuding houses, its kleptocratic bureaucracy, its cynical exploitation of the masses, was saved not because it deserved salvation, but because the enemy was unwilling to annihilate it utterly. And in this, humanity lost. For the clans, with all their arrogance and zealotry, represented something more than an existential threat. They represented the possibility of renewal, even if through fire. Their defeat allowed the Inner Sphere to fester in its mediocrity, to stumble forward as a patchwork of decaying states clinging to past glories and pettier ambitions. And yet there is a terrible beauty in what the clans represented. They were humanity's dark mirror, the embodiment of its dreams, stripped of sentimentality and burdened with the cold logic of evolution. Their warriors, bred for conflict and honed by ritual, were avatars of purpose in a galaxy defined by its purposelessness. They were not moral by any conventional measure, but they were undeniably noble in their pursuit of perfection. In their defeat, the clans revealed not the strength of the Inner Sphere, but its fragility. The spheroids did not overcome the clans through valor or ingenuity alone. They triumphed because their enemies chose to fight a battle that was as much about honor as conquest. This, then, is the bitter truth of Tukayyid. It was not a triumph of humanity, but a deferment of its reckoning. The 15 years bought by the truce of Tukayyid were not years of growth or enlightenment. They were years of squandered opportunity in which the inner sphere prepared for another round of internecine bloodletting rather than addressing the existential challenges posed by the clans. The victory secured the survival of the species, but not its ascendance. It ensured that humanity would continue to crawl rather than soar. One might be tempted to romanticize the clans, to see them as tragic heroes betrayed by their own ideals, but that would be to misunderstand the true nature of their tragedy and ours. The clans were not saviors, they were conquerors. Yet in their defeat they unwittingly preserved a system that was far worse than anything they could have imposed. Humanity's greatest failure at Tukayyid was not that it survived, but that it failed to learn. The battle was a mirror held up to our collective face, and what it revealed was something far less noble than the warriors we so narrowly overcame. Tukayyid was a defeat for humanity, precisely because it was framed as a victory. It allowed us to delude ourselves into thinking we had prevailed, when in truth we had merely postponed the inevitable confrontation with our own shortcomings. The clans, for all their faults, were agents of change, and in their temporary defeat we chose stagnation. The tragedy of Tukayyid is not that it happened, but that we failed to rise above it. The question that remains is whether we will ever find the courage to do so.